Alright, so today we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now, rather than factoring or completing the square, we can use an actual formula to solve a quadratic equation. Quadratic equations are normally set up in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay? There's a literal formula where you can take a, b, and c and plug those numbers in to figure out what x is. That formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now this actually goes to the tune of row, row, row your boat, but we'll skip that for now. So basically what you can do is you can take a, b, and c, plug them into their respective spots on this formula, simplify this equation, and figure out what x is. There's no factoring, there's no completing the square, there's no, well, there is a square root, but other than that, it's just basically evaluating a formula, which you should know how to do, right? It's plugging in and getting an answer. So what we're going to do is go over a few examples of how to use the quadratic formula. Okay? So our first example, okay, is going to be x squared plus 10x minus 21 equals 0. Okay? So what we have to do is first identify a, b, and c. Well, there's no number in front of x squared, so automatically that's 1. That means that a is 1. B is going to be positive 10, and c is going to be negative 12. The signs do matter, so make sure that you include them in when you're identifying the letters. So now what we do is we're going to write our equation. Okay, and from here, we're just going to fill in the pieces. So I have x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now remember, a is 1. You still have to plug it in just so you keep everything squared away. C is negative. We have to keep that negative sign. Now all we have to do is worry about what's inside the radical first. Okay, we have to simplify this first. So I'm going to go ahead and write it over here so that I have a little more room. X equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root. Everything's over. 2 times 1 is going to be 2. Inside the radical, 10 squared. 10 squared is 100. Okay, so we have this figured out. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then negative 4 times negative 21. Negative times a negative, that's going to be positive. 4 times 21, that's going to be 84. Okay? Negative 4 times positive 1 times negative 21, that's going to be a positive 84. Okay, if you're unsure, if you're not very confident with negative numbers, use a calculator. It's all right. It's there for your use. So now we just have to simplify this. Well, x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root. 184 is 184 all over 2. Okay, so now what we have to do is figure out what the square root of 184 is, and I'm actually going to go ahead and grab a calculator. Okay, so square root of 184. That's going to be 2 times the square root of 46. The square root of 84, if you type that into your calculator, it will simplify to 2 square roots of 46. And we're going to leave it that way. We're not going to take the square root of 46 because it's not a number that's going to produce an even square root. Okay, it's going to give us a decimal, and we really don't want that. We're just going to deal with this, leave it as is. Everything is still over 2. Okay, from here, all we can do is simplify. Negative 10, 2, and 2. Okay, those are all even numbers. They can all be divided by 2. So what I'm going to do is simplify. Everything's even. If I divide 2 by itself, that becomes 1. This 2 also becomes 1. If I divide negative 10 by 2, this becomes negative 5. So right now, my answer is going to be x equals negative 5 plus the square root of 46, or x equals negative 5 minus the square root of 46. These are my 2 possible answers. Again, the square root of 46 doesn't simplify any further, so that's where we leave it. We're going to move on to our second example. Our second example is 2x squared plus 11x minus 6 equals 0. Now again, we need to identify our a, b, and c values. Well, a is going to be 2, b is going to be positive 11, and c is going to be negative 6. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and plug that into our formula. Again, our formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and plug those values in. I have x equals negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 11 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 6 all over 2 times 2. So my a, b, and c values have all been plugged in. Now it's my job to simplify as much as I can. I have x equals negative 11 plus or minus inside the square root. 11 squared is 121. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Times negative 6, that's a positive 48. So I have negative 8 times negative 6, that's a positive 48. So plus 48. All over 2 times 2 is going to be 4. I'm going to go ahead and continue simplifying up over on that side. So all I have to do here is add these two numbers together. Okay? This is going to be x equals negative 11 plus or minus the square root. 121 plus 48 is going to be 169. And we still have 4 in the bottom of that fraction. Okay? From here we have to worry about what the square root of 169 is. The square root of 169 is going to be 13. So x equals negative 11 plus or minus 13 divided by 4. Okay? So far we have x equals negative 11 plus 13 over 4 and x equals negative 11 minus 13 over 4. Okay? Negative 11 plus 13 is going to be negative 2 over 4. Negative 2 over 4 is going to reduce to negative 1 over 2. So that's our first answer. Negative 11 minus 13 is going to be negative 24. We're still dividing that by 4, and that leaves us with x equals negative 6. So our two answers to this solution are x equals negative 1 over 2 and x equals negative 6. We're going to move on to our third and final example of how to use the quadratic formula, and that would be a different looking equation than what we've seen previously. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and change colors because my marker's dying. Our last example is going to be 5x squared minus 5 equals negative 13x. Okay, now every time we've worked with a quadratic equation, we always want it to be in the order of ax squared plus bx plus c, right? So I want x squared, x, no x. On the right side, I need it to be 0, right? So I can't have anything on that right side. So that means I need to move this 13x over to the left side. I do that by adding 13x to both sides. Okay? Now remember, x squared and x are not like terms, so I cannot add 5 and 13 and call it 18x cubed, right? That doesn't work. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the right order. That's going to be 5x squared plus 13x minus 5 equals 0. Now everything's in the right order. I can go ahead and label my a, b, and c values. A is going to be 5, b is 13, and c is negative 5. We're going to go ahead and plug that into our formula. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, again, the first thing we have to do is simplify this radical. Okay, we're going to do that by first worrying about 13 squared. $13 squared is 169. And then we have to worry about what's left. Negative 4 times 5, that's negative 20. Negative 20 times negative 5 is going to be a positive 100. Okay? And then on the bottom, I have 2 times 5, that's going to be 10. I still have to put these two numbers together to get this radical as simple as possible. So when I add those two numbers together, I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 269. It's still all being divided by 10. Okay, so we're going to take our calculators and type in the square root of 269. Okay, that doesn't reduce at all, so this is where we're left off with, right? I don't have anything that I can factor this with. This doesn't have a factor of 3. Everything's going to be a decimal. This is a prime number. I don't have any factors that I could square root off of that, so I'm left with this square root of 269. So far I have x equals negative 13 plus the square root of 269 divided by 10, and x equals negative 13 minus the square root of 269 all over 10. And this is okay. These answers are perfectly fine. If you can't take the square root of 269, then that's all you can do. That's as far as you can go. But please use your calculators. Make sure that that is in fact as simple as you can make that radical. If you can reduce it, then you have to, right? If you can't, then this is where we're going to stop. So these are going to be our two answers. And that is how you use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation.